Hello and welcome back to the Nothing Notable podcast. My name is Daniel and we are going to waste no time here. We're going to jump right into things because this podcast was recorded 2 days ago, and in that time, there have been a lot of free agent signings. Let's start with the Patriots. They made probably the biggest free agency push so far, and they made a number of key signings, including Jonnu Smith on a 4-year deal, Hunter Henry on a 3-year deal, Matt Judon, Jalen Mills, Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne. They traded for Trent Brown. Just a number of really, really big signings, the splashiest of signings. The Kansas City Chiefs were the winner in the Joe Thuney contest. They signed him for 5 years, $80 million. That's going to be a big help for them in their offensive line after what we just saw in the Super Bowl. The Jacksonville Jaguars, they've made quite a few moves. They got Shaquille Griffin from the Seahawks, Rayshon Jenkins from the Chargers, Roy Robertson Harris, a good defensive tackle from the Bears. And then a number of other moves. They signed Carlos Hyde, a good backup running back, Tyson Alualu, Marvin Jones, who's had 9 touchdowns in each of the last 2 seasons. They also traded for Malcolm Brown and then signed him to an extension. So pretty good group of guys there. They're going to build up around Trevor Lawrence and hopefully make a push this year. The Detroit Lions re-signed my guy, Romeo Okwara, 3 years, $39 million. The Cincinnati Bengals have made 3 really big moves that I really like. They signed Trey Hendrickson, Chitibaya Wuzier, and Mike Hilton. All 3 of these guys were 3 of my favorite free agents this offseason. The Jets have made a lot of really smart moves. They snagged Jack's favorite player out of this free agent class, Carl Lawson, really talented defensive end. Bud Dupree signed a huge deal with the Titans, 5 years, $85 million, so good for you, Bud Dupree. Tyus Bowser re-signs with the Ravens. The Dolphins go out and sign Jacoby Brissett. He'll be a very good backup to Tua. The Texans go out and sign quarterback Tyrod Taylor to a 1-year deal that could be up to $12.5 million. So that'll be something really interesting to watch as we progress throughout the season. I have a text here from Jack. He says, Andy Dalton versus Nick Foles in Chicago may be the grossest quarterback competition since Mitch Trubisky versus Nick Foles. So I agree with that. Ryan Fitzpatrick goes to the Washington football team, name yet to be determined. The Falcons restructure Matt Ryan's contract, which almost certainly means that they won't be taking a quarterback with the 4th overall selection this NFL draft. And lastly, the Saints go ahead and re-sign Jameis Winston. So those are some of the notable free agent signings so far. I just wanted to throw this in at the beginning so that everything was as relevant and up to date as humanly possible. Now, without further ado, let's jump into the podcast.
All right, so this is Sunday, March 14th. The unofficial tampering period for free agency starts tomorrow, Monday, at about 12 o'clock Pacific time, I believe. We've had a couple of moves so far, like kind of the biggest and most important one, but also like not, because we kind of all thought it was already happening, was Drew Brees officially retired. What are your thoughts on this Drew Brees retirement here?
I'll keep it quick, but Drew Brees has always been one of my favorite quarterbacks ever since I first started watching football. You know, he's a guy that I think just plays the game the right way and statistically one of the best to ever do it.
Yeah, so Drew Brees retired. Another big news that happened today, Aaron Jones, the Packers all-pro running back, he re-signed with them. I believe it was, a 4-year, $48 million contract, if I remember correctly. That's right. Obviously a very talented player. There's a whole debate on whether or not running backs should be, or if it's worth it from a team building standpoint to pay a running back. I want to get your thoughts on that really quick.
Generally speaking, yeah, no, I don't think you should pay a running back pretty much ever, unless it's going to be like under $30 million. If we're talking about like a second tier, and by second tier, I mean like not a superstar like Christian McCaffrey or Alvin Kamara or those type of guys, but like a second tier, like, I don't know, like an Aaron Jones, for example. If you're paying them under 30 million, like in that 25 to 30 mil range, I'm comfortable paying them that kind of money because they bring a lot of value. But generally speaking, you can manufacture a lot of wins with just, you know, a bunch of nobodies. I mean, look at the Niners, look at the Patriots, look at a number of teams that have done this over the years. But with Aaron Jones specifically, I'm kind of happy that they actually signed him, because signing him, I think it shows a little bit of good faith from the organization's point of view to say like, hey, Aaron Rodgers, that is, we have not given you weapons whatsoever. We're going to keep this one weapon that you've gone to a lot in the last few years. We're going to keep him around. So please don't leave us.
Yeah, he's obviously been a very important part of their team. And I don't have so much an issue with the contract as I do with the fact that, like, in the big picture of what the Packers have done building their team, is They're going to have to let Corey Linsley go most likely now, who was their starting center, one of the top 4 or 5 centers in the game right now. And last year they used their second round pick on A.J. Dillon, a running back who is very good. But now your 2 picks last year were a quarterback who you're kind of hoping is not going to have to see the field. Yeah. And a backup running back who's only going to touch the ball, 7-8 times a game. And you need wide receivers. And in one of the deepest wide receiver classes in recent memory, you didn't get one. Fortunately for them, this year's class just as deep. So we'll see what they can do. But yeah, good for Aaron Jones. I always want players to get their money. This is a pro player podcast.
Pro player podcast. That's right.
Pro player podcast. Please come on our podcast if you are a player and want us to, hype you up, because we will absolutely do it. Other moves that happened so far, Levante David signed a contract with the Buccaneers, re-signed with them for a lot less money than I thought he was going to get. It's only I think 10 or 11 million per year. I thought he was going to be pushing the 15, 16 million range. Bucks are they're one of the teams where I don't think they really need to go out and make many moves. They just got to bring all their guys back and they will be a super competitive team.
For sure. Yeah. And Levante David has been one of the best linebackers, top 8 linebackers for many years now. But I feel like this year, particularly in the playoffs, everyone, just because they were having such success and they ended up winning the Super Bowl, everyone kind of got a taste of the Levante David treatment, how well he can actually play and how much he provides to the defense. So yeah, good for Levante David, good for the Bucks. That's a good re-signing because he's a huge piece of their defense.
Absolutely. Speaking of the Niners and huge pieces of one side of the ball, Kyle Juszczyk, the versatile fullback, best fullback in the league, re-signed for a 5-year, $27 million deal. We don't have all the full details on what the cap hit for it is going to be this year, but I, for one, am very excited that they got him back. I know people will question why they're paying money to a fullback, especially when they need to dole out the big bucks for Trent Williams. But I think it's very evident when you watch the games that the offense is much more effective when Kyle Juszczyk is on the field. And it just gives them more options they can run out of. They can do, 21 personnel or 22 personnel and still be a passing threat on the field. So I, for one, am all for the move. What about you? What are your thoughts here?
He's one of the best Swiss Army knife players in the entire NFL. You can ask him to do just about anything. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He could go run. I mean, he's gone out wide and run deep routes as a wide receiver many times in the Shanahan offense.
Yep.
He can run the ball. He can block like nobody's business. So, and then on top of that, he's just like one of the smartest players in the NFL. Gives really great interviews. Really nice guy, it seems like.
Did you know he went to Harvard?
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know if you're aware of this, but he went to Harvard.
That's right. He scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl when we lost to the Chiefs. And as soon as he scored, I was like, I bet you that's the first ever player from Harvard to score a touchdown in the Super Bowl. And then I looked it up and I was like, that's right. It was.
There you go.
It was good for Harvard. Good for Kyle Juszczyk.
You mentioned his intelligence, and I think that is, if we want to look at things from the bigger picture here, something to keep in mind, because the 49ers are a team where it kind of seems like they may have a lot of turnover in the next 12 months on offense. Yeah. The quarterback situation, we'll dive into it in a little bit, but it's murky to say the least. If you bring in a young guy there, Kyle Juszczyk is someone who I feel like knows the scheme very well and knows where like all the pieces need to be on a particular play. And I think he'll be able to help a young quarterback with that. And if we look forward another year, Raheem Mostert's on a 1-year deal. Jeff Wilson's on a 1-year deal. We all know Shanahan loves his undrafted free agent running backs. They'll probably bring in one of those guys this year. It gives them someone who I think can help, again, ingratiate those running backs into the game plan and the scheme. So it's more than just like an X's and O's thing that's going on here, I think.
Yeah, I think that's important to consider whenever a team drafts a quarterback, just in general. Like, it's not just who your backup quarterback is, because that's often who we look to be like, okay, who's the mentor for this young quarterback? It's not just the backup quarterback, but it's also, it's your fullback, it's your left guard. It's whoever knows the offense the best is going to allow for the quarterback, while he's still learning, to they'll erase some of those mistakes, basically. And Kyle Juszczyk isn't a mistakes eraser for the Niners. So that's a big signing. I think every team has a guy like a Kyle Juszczyk, but not every team is willing to pay a guy like a Kyle Juszczyk.
Good distinction there. Good point. I think that more or less covers all the news that's happened in the last, 24, 48 hours or so. There was the Dak Prescott contract too. I feel like that's been talked to death, though, over the last 3 years, honestly, of people talking about Dak. Good for Dak. I met him once in Chicago. Very nice guy. But let's dive in looking ahead to free agency. Like we mentioned, it technically starts tomorrow at about 12 p.m. Players cannot officially sign with teams until the Wednesday when the league year begins. This is a really good free agent class, I think. Before we dive into who exactly is in it, I want to talk a little bit about how the cap situation this year is going to affect the free agent market. The cap this year is set at $182.5 million, which is down from, I believe it was $196 million the year before. And the cap has been going up and up and up. So if there wasn't COVID, the cap was projected to maybe touch $200 million this year. How do you think this cap situation here and the depressed number is going to impact what players are getting, what type of moves teams are making?
Well, there's going to be a lot of guys that just, get cut to save money. There's going to be a lot of restructuring. On top of that, guys that are top tier free agents are just going to have to take less money. I think likely because the TV deals are going to go nuts in a few years. So I think, even though we're not really talking about the Dak Prescott contract because it's been talked to death, the biggest point about the Dak Prescott contract is that it gives him the option sort of to come back out once that TV deal is up. And so he's able to make even more money that
He's
way.
only going to be 31, I think, when his contract expires.
The big point about the Dak contract is just that he's giving himself the option to make more money in the future. With that in consideration, I think that there's a lot of agents that would advise their players to kind of look at it in the same way. Like, let's not go for the big 5-year deal right now. Let's go for the deal that's going to give us the best option a couple years out. So I think there's going to be a bunch of weird signings. It's going to be like, hey, do you remember when Jadeveon Clowney was on the Dolphins for 1 year? Yeah, that was weird. Just something like totally random like that. I think there's going to be a bunch of guys that just sign a 1 or a 2 year deal at a price that's below their talent level. They're probably going to have to sacrifice a little bit financially. And if you're going to sacrifice something financially, you probably want to go to a team that's going to have the best chances of winning a Super Bowl. So I actually think there's a chance that there's a little bit more top heaviness that comes out of it because of that. I mean, I think it'll be a relatively similar free agency. Just some of the top tier dollars are just going to go down a little bit. And I think that they're going to have more options in the contract, more escape routes, more exit plans.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. I think we'll also see a lot more players taking 1 year, almost like mercenary type contracts where they just go somewhere for a little bit cheaper than they would have, either be at a place where they know they can go and be competitive for a title this year, or somewhere where there's such a scheme that they will be able to boost up their stats a little bit to when they hit the market next year and the cap is hopefully higher than it was this year, collect a bigger payday. It's really unfortunate that some of these players are hitting free agency right now. Yeah. Because there's some of these mid-tier guys. Why would a team want to go out there and, no disrespect to him, but pay a guy like Xavier Rhodes, for example, $4 million or something when they can draft someone in the 3rd or 4th round who will maybe be a little bit less than what they want right now, but give them it for a third of the cost. So it's an unfortunate time for the players, but I think there are going to be some players who are able to use it for their benefit in the long term.
For sure. And I think as we were talking off mic about this Taysom Hill contract, that's just a made up contract, something that does it's just Fugazi, it's Fugazi, it's a Wazi, it's a Woozy, it's fairy dust, like my boy Matt McConaughey said. But I think this is like always existed, like we were just talking about off mic, but this year particularly, it's just like the cap is just completely made up. So
it's made up.
I still think a lot of these guys are going to get paid, like you said, not as much as they would. There's probably going to be more mercenary deals, but the cap it isn't so much the concern. I think it's more so there's a lot of owners that just don't want to pay out of pocket. They don't want to be paying those signing bonuses.
And then there's some that are 100% willing to do that.
Exactly. So there's a chance that like the Miami Dolphins just run up on free agents this offseason. They just go and get like Romeo Okwara, Trey Hendrickson, Jadeveon Clowney. They have every defensive lineman,
Only defensive linemen. They get no help for Tua. They just draft a bunch of defensive linemen.
And they have the number 1 defense in the NFL and the 31st offense in the NFL behind the miserable Patriots.
You mentioned a couple names there. I wonder, are Romeo Okwara and Trey Hendrickson, are those some players who are going to appear on our next segment here, which is our underrated free agents? Now, it's a loaded free agent class like we talked about. Everyone knows about players like Kenny Gallaudet and Will Fuller and Shaq Barrett. But who are some of those players who you think are flying under the radar who could make a great impact on a team this next year?
So I'll go position by position, not every position, but just sort of positional groups. We're going to talk quarterbacks later, so we'll talk about those guys in a minute. The running backs, obviously, Aaron Jones that's the top domino that's already fallen. He got $48 million, so now that means that there's guys like Chris Carson that are going to be getting a little bit more money than one would probably expect. In the running back class, I think Leonard Fournette is somebody to just keep your eye on.
Yeah.
It didn't really work out in Jacksonville, but then playoff Lenny came alive, and now he's going to get himself paid. I don't know if he maybe goes on one of those mercenary deals with the Bucs again and just re-signs and comes back for another year. He's still young. He's only, I think, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, he's super young.
Then just a couple of other names to just mention. I still think Adrian Peterson can be a 1,000-yard rusher.
Damn.
He would be a cheap veteran contract to just put on your roster. Phillip Lindsay is a guy I've always liked. I really like Jamal Williams. I like Marlon Mack. I like Tevin Coleman. These are all guys that I think aren't going to demand $30 million contracts, but could give you 1,000-yard rushing seasons. I think Phillip Lindsay can do that. I think that Leonard Fournette can do that. So there's a number of these guys in the running back position, and there's literally 1,000 running backs that you can sign this year. So I think a lot of them can go for pretty cheap, which is pretty fun.
I love that you threw Marlon Mack on that list. He's coming off an injury, missed all of last year. So I think he's going to be one of those guys who signs just a super cheap, like 1 year, $2 to $3 million deal. And a guy who we look up, come, December, January, we're like, wow, one of the best signings of the offseason. Because I think Marlon Mack is a super talented running back and has been super productive in his time with the Colts. I mean, geez, we're 2 years removed from him having almost 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns. Like, very quality player, can do a little bit of everything for you. Definitely a sneaky pick there. I think people should keep their eye on.
For sure. Now, moving over to the wide receivers, there's a bunch of speed demons and speed is something that I'm always attracted to in wide receivers. Let me first say this, though. There are certain positional groups that get a little bit crossed in my brain because there are some guys in Madden that are so good, but are not so good in real life. Guys like John Ross, for example. No
John
disrespect
Ross is a
to John
Madden
Ross.
legend. Oh, man.
He's a Madden legend. He's got at least, I think it's 96, 97 speed to begin with, and he's a punt return king. Anyway, so there's a number of those kind of guys that I'm going to throw in here anyway, just because I think that they have the upside because they have the physical tools enough for me to dominate in Madden.
I think John Ross, though, I've always felt that he's like a talented guy who just needs to, stay healthy and get the opportunities. But I digress. I'm pro John Ross.
This is a pro John Ross
It's a pro
podcast.
John Ross podcast. I know he didn't work out as like the 8th overall pick, but I digress.
Yeah. So Kenny Gallaudet is one of the bigger ticket guys. Super talented. He's had a number of really productive years, been wasted away in Detroit. But guys like Curtis Samuel is a guy that I love.
Love him.
Yeah. He's young. He's got speed. He's got hands. He's a pretty good route runner. Still, still has a lot to prove, but he's been playing really, really great football in Carolina. A couple of older guys, T.Y. Hilton and Sammy Watkins are guys to watch also. I'm curious. I'm more so curious about those two than I am interested in them. When I talk about these free agents, I'm not necessarily saying like this is who I want my team to take. More so just like I'm interested in seeing what happens with them. Sammy Watkins, only 28, so he's not quite an old man, but he's certainly a veteran. Had some productive seasons in Kansas City. Definitely reshaped the conversation about his career. Instead of being a failed number one, he was like a really good number three. And he could go to another team and be a really good number two. And so I'd like to see that for Sammy Watkins.
I actually think Sammy Watkins back in Buffalo would be interesting.
Yeah. I'm always down for a reunion.
Yeah.
I'm always into that. D.D. Westbrook also is an interesting guy. I like D.D. Westbrook a lot. Has a similar issue to Kenny Gallaudet. Has just been on a trash team for a while. And whenever you're looking at guys that are putting up big numbers on terrible teams, you have to kind of be wary because they are usually just the number one option on the terrible team. So
he also just weirdly didn't play this year. Like he just kind of got pushed to the bottom of the depth chart.
Yeah. So you got to be wary of situations like that. But still, the talent is there, and so I'm a D.D. Westbrook guy. And then lastly, I like Brashad Perriman. Yeah, another guy that just has physical tools that I like that could slide in as your third or your second best receiver on a team. You could probably get him on a cheap contract. It's really speed that I'm looking for right now because when you look at the blueprint of what the Kansas City Chiefs have been able to do, it's speed. What the Niners were doing a few years ago was they were getting guys that were just fast. Raheem Mostert and Marquise Goodwin. They were just going for blazers that could run the scheme. So those are the guys that I'm looking at in the wide receiver group.
I'm going to throw, I love all those wide receivers you mentioned. Love all wide receivers.
It's a pro wide receiver podcast.
It's a pro wide receiver podcast where we love them all. We will take any of them to come on this podcast and talk about how much they love being a wide receiver. But there's one guy I want to throw out there. One of the greatest wide receivers of the last decade. Injuries have kind of hurt his last couple years, but a guy who I think has something left in the tank and could really help a team out. Adriel Jeremiah Green.
Yeah, big fan.
The future Hall of Fame wide receiver for the Bengals. I think, we talk about guys who are going to take a one-year deal and maybe boost back up their value. I think he can be one of those guys where if he puts in a good 16-game season and as the number two of a team and just doesn't even have to get you like 1,200 yards or something. If he's a 750, 800-yard type of guy, gets you 5-6 touchdowns, I think he's a guy who's poised to have a real bounce-back year, I think, depending on where he goes, if he gets to the right situation.
Yeah, I totally agree. You put him on a team with a young, up-and-coming, strong-armed quarterback that needs like a really talented, sure-handed receiver that can run all the routes and can learn the offense really quickly. You're going to be in for a really good AJ Green season. There's a number of teams that come to mind that could definitely benefit from having him and having his presence in the locker room. He also just, in an alternate universe where Tom Brady never left the Patriots, would be like, he would be a 1,500-yard receiver he would be like Randy Moss for the Patriots if they picked him up.
I love him if he goes to like a team who's going to draft a quarterback this year, like the Jags or the Jets this year, where they already have like a couple of guys, like the Jags have, oh my God, what's his name? DJ Shark and Laviska Shenault. But if he steps in there and kind of just be a veteran voice, I think that's a great spot for him personally.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Jets is a really good spot. I like him in the Chargers uniform. I like him in a Dolphins uniform. I like him anywhere that there's a young quarterback that needs a really good receiver. All
right, who's next on your list here? What group are we moving on over to?
I'm moving. There's a dumb amount of offensive linemen and tight ends, so you can look them up yourself. But there's a number of guys. Joe Thuney is the number one that's coming off of a lot of boards. He's a really talented offensive lineman. You put him in on any offensive line, and you don't even have to worry about that position anymore. Yeah. But moving over to the defensive side, there's a number of edge rushers that I'm interested in. We already mentioned Romeo Okwara is. I think he's my guy right now. Yeah. That's my Seth Curry to the 76ers. Trey Hendrickson has been one of my favorite like young defensive linemen. He's a guy that I always take in Madden also. I always put him on a team if I'm doing like a fantasy draft sort of a thing. just a really talented defensive lineman. I don't know a number of these guys that I'm talking about. I don't know if they're going to re-sign with their original teams. I don't know how likely it is that they actually go and sign somewhere else.
Well, the Saints have no money, so.
Right, but yeah, exactly. So Trey Hendrickson is a guy that just because of the cap situation with the Saints, they might not be able to give him the contract that he is going to be after. I think a lot of aggregators have been placing him as like one of their top 10 free agents, or at least one of their top 10 like under the radar free agents. So I think that there's a number of teams that'll be bidding on him and they'll outbid each other and he'll get a pretty sizable contract. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Trey Hendrickson can do.
I like him. I think he's another one. I don't think he's one of these guys who will get a 1-year deal because he's on the younger end. But I think, like you mentioned, I think a couple of teams will be in the mix. He's one of those guys where like every team can use him. So he's probably going to have 25 to 30 teams who are looking at him. So I think he's one of the guys who I think he'll sign a bigger contract than I think most people expect, but will absolutely be worth it.
Yeah, totally agree. We were just talking about the Niners. Kerry Hyder is just like an interesting, real cheap defensive lineman that can put up anywhere from like 5 to 9 to 10 sacks for you with like not that many snaps. Had no business being as good as he was last year, but because of all the injuries, just got a lot of playing time and put up some pretty gaudy numbers, all things considered. He would at least be a really talented rotational player that could provide you a lot of speed and a lot of strength coming off the edge on third downs and in key blitz situations. So he's the guy that I'm looking at as well.
I have one more name I want to throw out there.
For sure.
And we're going to start this one off by, it's a little quiz. Okay?
Love it.
This player here was 4th in QB pressures last year. The only players who had more were TJ Watt, Joey Bosa, and Aaron Donald. Who is this player?
By God, I don't know. Tell me.
It is former Cincinnati Bengals defensive end Carl Lawson.
Carl Lawson, yeah, okay.
I think Carl Lawson is going to be maybe the sneakiest free agent of this whole class. He did not get the sack numbers last year, but I also think sacks sometimes they're not overvalued in like the terms of game impact, but by fans, fans kind of sometimes only look at sacks and are like, this player only had 5 sacks last year. He's not that good. He was getting in the backfield like every goddamn play. I think Carl Lawson is a terrific player who is going to sign for way less money than he should. Yeah, that's my sneaky guy of literally the whole free agent class.
Totally, yeah, I totally agree. He's also on my list. Like I'm staring at his name right now. I didn't mention him. I didn't mention him because I thought it was just like such a given, like that this dude's a baller. So I'm glad that you mentioned it. Moving into the interior D line, I'm just going to mention a couple of guys. I'm not even going to mention all the guys on my list. I'm just going to talk about 2 guys that I love, 2 guys that I respect.
We love defensive linemen.
We love Solomon Thomas and DJ Jones.
Yes.
Solomon Thomas, I don't know if it'll ever work out. I think he's a guy that I'm just waiting for him to sign with the Jets, honestly, because of the Robert Saleh connection. But he could go to any number of teams, and I think that the biggest issue with the Niners was he just never fit.
Yeah.
We were playing him on the edge. He's not an edge guy, but he's also he almost has the physical tools to be an edge guy, but he's really like naturally an interior guy. So I think he could go to a team like the Jets and they could really utilize him the way that he's supposed to be utilized.
He's a guy who I feel like should have been used in the the Michael Bennett role that the Seahawks were using Michael Bennett in for years. That type of defender, not so much like an edge, like pass rusher type guy.
Right. He before the injury, he was kind of killing it against the run.
Yeah.
Like he was a really good run stuffing defensive lineman. He could really help out a defense. Again, another guy that could just be a rotational piece at worst.
Jets is a great spot for him.
And then DJ Jones, I think he's a guy that I'd like to see the Niners re-sign.
Yeah.
But if they don't re-sign him, I think another team could end up with a really talented defensive lineman with a lot of upside.
100% agree. Big DJ Jones fan.
But I'm going to move over to the linebackers now.
Yeah, let's keep it moving here.
Quan Alexander.
Yep.
Former 49ers, and I'm just naming 49ers at this point.
We're a pro 49ers podcast.
We sure are. We're a pro Homer podcast. Quan Alexander, was really good in San Francisco. And he was really good with the Saints also. He's a heat-seeking missile on defense.
Energy guy, too.
He flies. Big energy guy. The leader of the Hot Boys for the Niners.
Yeah. And I believe he's injured right now. I think he had a partially torn Achilles or something like that, some sort of Achilles injury. So I don't know if he's going to be ready to go by the start of the season, but maybe we get late into the summer and he's still sitting there. I think he's a guy who a team could pick up, and by the end of the season, he's making some contributions to them.
Absolutely. I'll just mention a few names, but I won't go into any detail. Jared Davis, I like a lot. Denzel Perryman, I like a lot. Eric Wilson, I like a lot. Jaylen Brown, I like a lot. Those are just some of the linebackers that I'm looking at. You have any other names to throw on the list?
No, I think you got some nice ones there. I was excited to see Matt Milano of the Bills hit the market, but they re-signed him again for way cheaper than I thought he was going to go for.
Yeah, a lot of these teams are going to get real lucky this offseason. Turning to the defensive backs, looking at some cornerbacks, there's a ton. So I won't waste too much time. There's literally 1 million 76 overall Madden cornerbacks. Yeah. I've always loved Nickel Roby-Coleman. I think he's just a fiery, talented player. Brian Poole of the Jets is ready to be plugged into just about any defense and play really solid starting cornerback. But my number one guy is Chitibaya Wuzier.
Yes, that was my number one guy too.
Hell yeah, there we go. He could be a top 12 cornerback in the NFL. Mm-hmm. So, and he's been connected to a lot of teams in free agency. So I think that he's another one of those guys
where like 32 teams could use him. In 2019, he was really excellent. He had a really great year. Last year was off. He got injured, I know, towards the end of the year. I think he only was able to play in 8 games overall. But again, one of these guys who I think what he's going to sign for, I think he's going to get a nice chunk of change. But what he's going to sign for is, I think, less than the value that he could potentially provide to a team.
Oh, absolutely. There's another guy. This will be my last cornerback before we go into safeties. Another guy that I've always wanted on the Niners. A guy that I was just praying that we could somehow find a way to draft him. And we ended up with a different guy. Didn't totally work out. Kind of did. But Patrick Peterson.
Yeah.
I really like Pat Pete. He's one of the best cornerbacks of the decade. Probably going to be, well, maybe a Hall of Famer. I don't know. We'll see.
I think so. I'm a pro Patrick Peterson Hall of Fame guy.
A ring would help.
A ring would absolutely help.
But he's a savvy, talented, intelligent vet. I think he's like 31, so he's
31,
technically over the hill. Mm-hmm. But like, I think he still has 3 more really solid years where he can be a really good starting cornerback in the NFL.
He's a guy who I think could come into any team and provide what Sherman provided to the 49ers the last few years, who, again, another good buy low target for teams, I think. But where he's not only productive on the field, but more so than that, brings a leadership quality to a defense. So you look at, again, some of these young teams I think would really benefit from getting a guy like Pat Pete out there. I love him. I've always been a big fan ever since his days at LSU.
Yeah, he's a killer. There's a bunch of safeties. I'll only mention one. He's been one of my favorite, well, he was one of my favorite prospects coming out of the draft at safety in a long time, and that's Keanu Neil.
Yeah.
I just really like Keanu Neil. He's had some injury issues, and it's definitely been going downward. Mm-hmm. He started off really strong. I think he had like 140 tackles his rookie year. Kind of just a real baller for the first few years. And then an injury derailment and kind of just, I don't know, a little bit mediocre.
There's a lot of like B-level safeties in this class.
Yeah.
And like he would fit in there. And I think that, they're all kind of going to suppress each other's markets a little bit. But Keanu, I think, would be a great addition to a lot of teams. The aforementioned Jaquiski Tart also would be a great safety. Honestly, a guy who gets an unfair rap, I think, from a lot of 49ers fans. Like a guy who honestly just gets, I think, shat on so much by 49ers fans, and I don't think deserves it, because when he's on the field, he's like a super productive guy and is like an absolute, he's a game changer out there. He's a really, really good safety. So he's a guy who's probably, the Jets have a ton of cap space, is going to go to the Jets, reunite with Robert Saleh. And
that's right.
Yeah. This is a pro Jaworski podcast.
It sure is. So we've gone through not all the positions, but most of the positions. There's a couple of names that like are just so obvious that I didn't mention them. But like Juju Smith-Schuster is like
Will Fuller.
Will Fuller.
Shaq Barrett.
The Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry, and a number of offensive linemen. So there is no shortage of talent in this free agency class, and I think that's obvious by the amount of time that we just devoted to a number of these like quote unquote B-level guys. There's so many players that I think go to a team on a fairly cheap contract and outperform that contract tenfold.
I think teams are going to be picking up dudes for just absolute bargains who are going to be... So there's going to be someone on the Super Bowl team this year, whoever it's going to be, who we're going to be like, how the hell did that guy get signed for such a cheap contract this year? There's absolutely going to be at least one of those guys out there because it is such a good free agent class, and there's not enough money to go around to pay all these guys.
And NFL Twitter is going to go nuts when that happens. They're going to be like, this is bullshit. This team cheated. The cap
conspiracy.
Is fake. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Did not expect to spend that much time on the free agents, but there is something highly important, maybe more important than any of the free agents that we have to talk about, and that is the absolute insane quarterback situations that we have going around in the league right now. I just jotted down a quick list earlier, and I believe I have 14 teams who do not have their quarterback who might be their Week 17 starter on the roster right now, which is absolutely insane.
When we were doing a preview pod before coming into this previous season, we were saying like that a lot of teams were set at quarterback, but I never said that with the intention like, oh, that they have their quarterback of the future.
For the next 5 years, yeah.
Right. It's like they have a quarterback and they're not going to move off of them even if they are not the right choice. Because when we come into the season and we say like, oh yeah, Mitch Trubisky is the Chicago Bears guy, that wasn't like, oh yeah, no, he's the guy forever. It's like he's the guy right now until he proves that he can't be the guy anywhere. So yeah, I've long suspected that all of these guys were going to be carouseled around. And so now we're getting closer. I still think by the beginning of the season, though, there's going to be just about the same amount of teams they're going to be in the same boat. It's like, well, we have Jameis Winston, but we're not totally there yet with him. You know, we have Mitch Trubisky, but we're not totally sold on him yet.
We have Derek Jimmy Carr, Garoppolo,
but yeah, there's just, and I think that's kind of just the nature of the quarterback position. I think every year it's kind of like that. We'll keep you until we can prove that there is somebody better than you. Which is the mentality that you should have for every position, obviously. But NFL Twitter doesn't understand that.
No. Basically, like, what I personally think it boils down to is it's really hard to find a guy who can win you, 7 to 9 or 10 games. Like, it's really hard to find a quarterback who can do that. There's not that many of them. But a lot of the times, those guys who are winning those 7 to 9 games are not the guys who can win you a Super Bowl. And that's where you see teams looking to upgrade off the guys like Derek Carr, Jimmy Garoppolo, or, Teddy Bridgewater, for example, those type of guys to get a guy who can win a Super Bowl. But the problem is there are like 3 of those guys. There's not a lot of those Super Bowl winning guys either. So you get into this situation where the hardest thing to do in sports is to find a franchise quarterback. And if you find one, you should hold on for dear life, so you can have that guy for the next 15 years. And, sometimes you let a fucking con man, snake oil salesman come in and just absolutely blow up your whole franchise. And his name might be Jack Easterby, and your franchise might be the Houston Texans. And
this is not a pro Easterby podcast.
No, honestly, Jack Easterby is a incompetent, disgusting... he you know what? He reminds me of Donald Trump in a lot of ways because he weasels his way in. He gets a couple people that he's like ingratiated with, and everyone else is like, "Who the fuck is this guy? What is he doing here?" And he just takes over. And let's just jump right into it, because that to me is the most intriguing storyline in all of sports right now, is what is going on with the Houston Texans. Unless you've been living under a rock, you may know that Deshaun Watson is not happy with the Texans right now, has requested to be traded, and the Texans, led by this motherfucker, Jack Easterby, are holding strong and don't want to move him, because why would you move your quarterback? And I have a feeling this is going to get super, super ugly in the next 4 months.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I thought it was a given like a few months ago that Deshaun Watson was going to get traded, because I've always been of the mentality that like if you have an unhappy superstar, it doesn't benefit you to hold on to them if they're going to sit out.
Yeah.
Or even if they play. Like, look at what happened with James Harden, moving over to the NBA real quick. Like, James Harden said, I will be engaged and I will play. And then he showed up in Houston, and they weren't going to be a good team. But I think he also kind of single-handedly lost them all of those games while he was there, because he was dogging it. I don't think if your guy is unhappy, he's not going to produce at the level that you want him to produce at. So it just doesn't benefit a franchise to keep somebody when there are just inconsolable differences, things that cannot be fixed. Deshaun Watson has decided that he is done. He's done with this organization, and I don't blame him at all. I don't think that we can fix this.
Nope.
I don't think that there's any sort of group therapy session that can, I don't think that there's going to be, it's somewhere deep down in my heart, I knew I love you. I don't think there's that coming in the future.
No.
So I just expected that they would eventually trade him. I thought they'd probably hold out as long as they could. Certainly to the draft, maybe even to the trade deadline, week 8. But now I don't know. It just seems it's almost starting to get malicious. It feels like
it feels really gross. And the draft is kind of this like pseudo deadline. It seems like that's in place for when they would have to, trade him initially, because you don't know what you're getting then with draft picks. If you trade him after that, you could be trading for a first round pick next year and ends up being like the 25th pick as opposed to like the 4th or 5th pick this year. The teams with the 4th and 5th pick aren't going to trade for Deshaun. That's the Falcons and the Bengals. That's not happening, but the point still stands. The rational thinking would be that, okay, we're at a standstill with Deshaun. We're not getting him to budge. Let's trade him, reload the franchise, and start over. The problem is Jack Easterby and the Houston Texans are not fond of rational thinking. That's not something.
They're not rational actors in this equation.
Rational actors. So I don't know what's going to happen. I saw this tweet here, and let me back up for a second, because I'm kind of all over the place here, because I have so many thoughts about this whole situation. A lot of people have been criticizing Deshaun, saying that, why did you sign that massive extension a year ago?
Right.
And now a year later, you're like, okay, I want out. They're like, you already traded DeAndre Hopkins. You knew what this was. I'm going to defend Deshaun's decision there. First of all, we see teams all the time do this with players, where they just decide they're done with a player and they kick him to the curb and the player gets absolutely nothing. As a pro player pod, we firmly stand on the stance that players should be allowed to have some control over their own, life, really. Like, these are people. This is affecting their day-to-day life. From a football and organizational standpoint, the person who was running the show at that time was not Jack Easterby. It was Bill O'Brien. And say what you will about Bill O'Brien, by all accounts, he seems like a decent person. Not a great coach, a fine coach, not a good GM, but like a decent person. And at least there was some sort of structure to the team there. Jack Easterby weaseled him out, because basically, it became choose O'Brien or Easterby, and Cal McNair, the owner, chose Easterby. And the whole franchise has been in chaos ever since. In many ways, Bill O'Brien was the one thing that was holding the Houston Texans together.
You couldn't write it.
You could not write it. None of us had a clue what's going on. I certainly hope that someday we do know what's going on. Deshaun has not talked about it because he's a man of super high character. I don't know. Jim Trotter, who's an NFL writer and the host of the Huddle and Flow podcast, he was on Rich Eisen earlier this week, and they were talking about Deshaun. And Jim Trotter has some inside information that he won't talk about because, people have morals in business sometimes. But he said on the Rich Eisen show, he said, "You will hear from Deshaun when this is all over. It's being chronicled. That's all I'm going to say." I feel for Deshaun because, his character's kind of getting assassinated right now too. People are saying that he's like selfish and blah, 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 blah. I don't know. I don't like where this situation is going, and I feel like it's going to get even uglier in the next 4 or 5 months.
I don't know if there's a higher character starting quarterback in the NFL, honestly. This dude has done so much for Houston, for Texas. Mm-hmm. He's donated game checks to various organizations for relief after natural disasters and done work with food banks. And this is a good person, a high character person.
He's one of my 3 favorite non-49ers players just because of how high of a character he is.
He's a great guy. So yeah, the character assassination's got to stop. I think that the character assassination is coming from people who don't really think that deeply about the whole power structure of like NFL owners versus players. Because to be pro player is to be pro worker, because they're the ones that are generating the money, the revenue. They are the ones who actually bring in the eyeballs. We're not watching for Jack Easterby. We're watching for Deshaun Watson.
No one gives a shit about Jack Easterby.
Exactly. So I think that people that are discrediting him and engaging in character assassination really need to have a hard look at themselves and think about like what they believe and who they would rather support. The owners that are making way more money than they should off of these guys that are bringing in all of the revenue, or the players who are the reason you're actually watching the game. So yeah, let's put that to bed, because that's some nonsense. No more character assassination. One thing that I think is holding them up outside of just all the petty nonsense is like, where do you trade him and what do you get back? Because this is a trade that has never happened before. So they're going to have to create the asking price that is right for Deshaun Watson. And I'm not sure if they're clever enough to do it. Yeah. So I think that they're kind of scared to pull the trigger just because they're at least Bill O'Brien, he could pull the trigger and he could make some bad trades, but like he would pull the trigger at least.
Jack Easterby is a man who lacks courage and therefore does not have the courage to make this trade. Look, we're pro player. We are very anti-Jack Easterby on this podcast.
Are they going to hold? How long do they hold out?
Yeah.
Like how are they going to keep him on the roster for a full season, or are they just going to when does enough become enough is basically what I'm trying to say. I'm providing almost no insight on the actual trade itself, but that's because there's no insight to be gleaned.
We have
anywhere.
No idea. These teams, I don't think really it's hard. They have to kind of continue operating as if Deshaun isn't available, because you can't count on the Texans to actually trade him. So it makes it, we don't know what's going to happen. We have no clue what's going on. And
the Texans are holding the NFL hostage right now.
Yes.
There are so many moves that could have been made for other teams that have not been made because the Texans don't know what to do with Deshaun Watson. If they would pull the trigger, if they would say one way or the other, like, we're going to definitively keep him. We don't care if he doesn't play a single snap. We're going to keep him for the whole season. One, that would be terrible. But two, at least like everyone could go about saying like, okay, well, he's off the table. Let's go do the next best thing. Or we are going to trade him. Everybody pony up. Give us your best offer. Show us the king's ransom. And whoever has the best offer, we're going to pit them against the person who has the second best offer. We're going to get them in a bidding war. We're going to get 18 first-round picks and a starting quarterback.
They absolutely could get the Dolphins and the Bears and the 49ers and the Jets and the Panthers all bidding for each other and outbidding each other, because all those teams would want Deshaun in an absolute heartbeat. Oh, boy. It's a tough situation. Another situation that kind of over the past couple weeks has just popped up is the Russell Wilson situation in Seattle, which when these reports first broke, a week or so after the Super Bowl, we all kind of just thought, okay, it's kind of just talk. Like, Russ is frustrated, but like nothing's going to come of it. Now in the last 2 or 3 weeks, it really seems like there's some, smoke here to these trade rumors. And what I want to know is if there's any fire behind them as well. Is Russ going to get traded?
I actually do think he'll get traded. I've long been in the camp of saying there is a negative 5% chance that Russell Wilson will get traded, just in our private text to each other.
Yeah. I believe I said about Russell Wilson being traded that I had a better chance to hang out with Dua Lipa.
Right.
Pro Dua Lipa podcast.
Very pro Dua Lipa. I hope were the Grammys tonight?
They were tonight.
Or is it next weekend? Oh, I hope she won.
Yeah.
But at this point, it's starting to feel, and I don't know if this is just media hype or if this is really how the actual people involved are feeling. But at this point, it's starting to feel like Carroll versus Wilson. And it seems like the organization is kind of leaning towards Carroll, which I think is the wrong way to go. I don't think that they're really willing to do what is necessary. You know, like Kylo Ren, you got to do what you got to do. Okay. Mm-hmm. You know what you have to do, but you don't have the strength to do it. Okay. Pete Carroll has been the issue. Their whole system, their whole scheme, the horrible game management and time management has cost them, I think, the chance at a dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
They end up winning one Super Bowl. They should have won more. I think the over under was really 2.5. It was what the over under was. They had that
quarterback and that defense and that running back and some pretty good weapons, and they did not win anything. I mean, they won one Super Bowl, but like they should have won 2, 3, maybe even 4.
I think he's thinking like, I could go anywhere,
mm-hmm.
and they could build around me, and I could win a lot of Super Bowls, because he thinks of himself as one of the best quarterbacks to ever play the game, because he probably is. I think he's going to get traded, because I think that the organization is not doing what they need to do. I think they need to side with Russell Wilson as opposed to Pete Carroll. They need to, handshake and sort of push Pete Carroll into retirement, make it seem like he went off on his own, like, oh yeah, I've done everything I had to do in the NFL. But really behind closed doors, it's like, okay, this is really a firing. Involve Russell Wilson with the next coach hire. Make sure that he feels like he's a part of the organization. He has a big say in what's going on, and then move forward. And then this is all just a blip. Like when Kobe Bryant asked to be traded from the
mm-hmm.
Lakers, just make it a blip.
No one remembers that.
Absolutely. So that's what you have to do, but I don't think that that's what they're going to do. I think Russell Wilson will be traded. If I'm the Chicago Bears, and we'll talk about this later probably, but if I'm the Chicago Bears, I'm offering the entire city.
Yeah.
They have never had a good quarterback. Make it happen.
No. I will circle right back around to the Bears in a moment, because I think that is maybe the most likely spot that he ends up. But you mentioned how Russell Wilson thinks of himself as one of the best quarterbacks in NFL history, and that he probably is. But that tracks with a report I saw earlier this week, and I cannot remember who it was by, and I feel so bad about that. But they were basically saying that the main issue of the rift here is that Russ thinks of himself as like a top 5 quarterback of all time, and currently believes he's not even viewed as like a top 10 quarterback of all time, and that the Seahawks don't view him as that either. And they gave him a chance to, like, quote unquote, let Russ cook this year. That was the thing. And they weren't able to get anything with that. So they're going to pull back the reins a little bit and like contain him more. And he really wants a chance to prove himself as one of those all-time great players. And I don't think the Seahawks are going to let him do that. So that's where the trade comes in as the only option for him to like achieve legacy-wise what he wants to at this point.
Here's my narrativizing of the whole situation. Okay, this is my hot take narrative. The Seahawks will never, ever truly believe in Russell Wilson
mm-hmm.
again because of the interception on the goal line the Super Bowl.
I think that's pretty accurate.
I think that's where it ended. I think that's at that point, the let Russ cook movement ended right there. I think from then on, I think you see this with a lot of quarterbacks. There were some moments where Jimmy Garoppolo in San Francisco maybe didn't hit a pass here, didn't hit a pass there, and you could tell that they sort of, it's not that they don't believe in him, but they push the offense in a different direction.
Yep.
They try to take it off of his shoulders. I think that there is residual trauma from that game-losing interception, but also I think that really wasn't Russell Wilson's fault. That was Pete Carroll's fault. So again, I think we're looking at the wrong person in these situations. I feel horrible for Seahawks fans, but not really.
But not
I'm pretty
really.
Happy, actually.
As 49ers fans, not really.
But I know a few Seahawks fans, and I know that Russell Wilson means so much to them and so much to Seattle. And Russell Wilson has talked about bringing back the Supersonics, being a part of an ownership group for an NBA team, what it means to be a Seahawk for life. He's talked about this a lot. So it's a bummer that it's going down this way. But if he wants to be the best version of himself, the best quarterback that he can be, I think that's with a different team.
Mm-hmm. That different team, I think, will be the Chicago Bears. There's kind of been some breadcrumbs the last week or so in moves that they've made that to me indicates they're going all in for this. First of all, they created, I think it was like $23 million in cap space by restructuring guys, which to me seems like they're trying to get enough money to fit Russ in under the salary cap. Number two was the fact that they tagged Allen Robinson, who is one of the, probably 10 best receivers in the league. There really had been no conversations of a contract extension with him for the last, 8 months, really. I was surprised to see him get tagged, but if they're going to bring in Russ, they're going to need someone for him to throw the ball to. And Allen Robinson and Darnell Mooney is a really good, I think, start of that. And then finally, there's the fact that I think head coach Matt Nagy and GM Ryan Pace are absolutely desperate. They know that their asses are on the line this year if they do not win. And they know they cannot roll out with Nick Foles as their starting quarterback week 1 to get that done. So when you put all those things together, I think it really makes sense that if the Seahawks are going to move Russ, if that's what the two sides decide to do, that the Bears are a fitting destination for him.
Guys in the organization are trying to save their ass. If it doesn't, there's so many times where a talented offensive or defensive coordinator gets the head coaching job. It doesn't work out. They're gone in 4 years and they never get a head coaching job ever again. That's good old Matt. Yep. That's what's going to happen to Matt. If things go poorly, that's very likely what's going to happen there. So I think he really, I don't know. I don't want to attribute what he's thinking and feeling, but I'll do it anyway. I think he's aware at least of the fact that if things don't work out this year, not only is he fired, but he likely will never have this opportunity again. And also, I think that he has the fans on his side with this move. Mm-hmm. If you give up 5 first-round picks for Russell Wilson, I don't think there's a single Chicago Bears fan that bats an eye. I think they're all on board immediately. Because I don't think there's any price that's too high to do this if you're the Chicago Bears, because they have not had a good quarterback. They are a great football team, or a great football city, I should say, and they deserve a really good quarterback. And Russell Wilson could play for another 8 years. Let's just pencil him in for the decade. Yeah.
To highlight how bad the Bears quarterback situation has been over the last, 70 years. Since 1950, Mitch Trubisky is 4th all-time in Bears passing yards.
Oh, no. No. Oh, that's so gross.
Number 1 is Jay Cutler.
Oh, of course.
Yes.
Good old Jay.
Old Jay. So, Bears got to get it done. This ended up being a lot longer right now than I thought it would be.
It's okay. We can cut. We
can cut. I want to hit some of these other teams, though. I'll just go through kind of the tiers of teams that I have, because I've kind of grouped them together, these teams that need quarterback help, and just chime in whenever you so feel like. I think there's 2 to 3 teams that will absolutely draft a quarterback this year. That is the Jaguars, most likely going to pick Trevor Lawrence, everyone would assume. The Jets, who are going to get someone at quarterback, going to draft a quarterback most likely with number 2. I don't think they're going to roll out there with Sam Darnold. We don't know who that will be yet. We will discuss this crop of quarterbacks further on our draft podcast come April. And then there's the Panthers, who I think, unless they're able to trade for Deshaun, will draft a quarterback.
I think there's like a 30% chance that the Jets roll out with Sam Darnold, just to be kind to the fella. But no, I think in all likelihood, there's no better value pick at number 2 than to go with a quarterback that you think can be a generational talent, whether that's Zach Wilson, Justin Fields, any of these guys, whoever you think your guy is, go and get him and then see what you got.
The next group of guys, so one of these teams is at 4, and these are the teams that have I put them in the old guy category, where they have aging quarterbacks. It's the Steelers and the Falcons. Ben Roethlisberger's more at the end of his rope than Matt Ryan is. I kind of have a feeling that the Falcons won't draft a quarterback at 4. There's a lot of people just kind of penciling them in right now for that, but I feel like Matt Ryan has 3 or 4 good years left in the tank. So I think they're going to keep him there for now. And then the Steelers, Big Ben, I honestly think, are we sure Big Ben's even good right now?
He's not.
No, he's not. No, he's not. And that's when he re-signed him, they're he's coming back. Everyone was so happy. And I'm I think this actually hurts the Steelers this year.
Very much.
Because he did not look good at the back half of the year.
To be quite honest, they went 10-0, right? Before they fell apart.
Yeah, they were maybe the worst 10-0 team I've ever seen, though.
Yes, I never was watching a Steelers game and thought, oh, Big Ben's got it. Even though that's what people were saying, and I never got it. I never understood what was happening. But for whatever reason, it was just oh no, Big Ben, Big Ben. Here's the thing. Here's the real test. If Big Ben was actually good last year, then he should have won Comeback Player of the Year.
Yes.
You know who did? Alex Smith won Comeback Player of the Year.
Who did not play particularly well.
No, not at all. And obviously the narrative is a big part of that. But if Ben Roethlisberger was really good last year, he would have won Comeback Player of the Year, but he didn't. He was not that good. Caught between a rock and a hard place right now. Next group of quarterbacks or teams I have on this list here is the teams who I think want to get a better quarterback, but aren't sure that they'll actually be able to do that. And the teams that fall into this group are the 49ers, the Raiders, the Broncos with Drew Lock, and just in the last day or so, I threw the Patriots back in here with them re-signing Cam Newton to a 1-year, $14 million deal that is structured very well for them. I think there's only $3 million guaranteed. But those teams to me are teams who want to get a new quarterback. They don't have necessarily the draft position that they'll be able to get one of those guys, and they're are in a position where they can't get rid of their quarterback right now because they would not have a quarterback on the roster then that they're confident in. All of these teams want to get better, but can't. And that's one of the most frustrating positions to be in, especially when you're talking about the position that matters the most, which is quarterback. Build up around your quarterback, prop them up a little bit, and then that's how you'll have a better shot. Because you don't have to have the best quarterback in the NFL to win a Super Bowl. Trent Dilfer won a Super Bowl. Okay?
Old Peyton Manning won a Super Bowl.
Right. So get good everywhere else. And hopefully you're not paying your guy too much money.
Right. The one guy I want to spend a little bit of a quick moment on here, just because, it's our team. We got to talk about it. We've talked ad nauseum about it in our, private messages, but the San Francisco 49ers and Jimmy G, one of the teams that I think is in maybe the toughest quarterback spot on this list, because they have a guy who I think they're very fine with at quarterback, but they're paying him a lot of money. They don't have a lot of cap space, and the big thing for me is that they don't know if he's going to stay healthy. And we've talked about this, but I think the Jimmy G conversation has been framed totally wrong. I don't think it's a question of ability with him, because I think we know what he is. He's fine. You would like someone more talented, but also you can get to a Super Bowl with him. We've seen that. It's more a question of availability, because he's missed, I think it's 57% of the games since he's been with the 49ers.
He likely won't stay healthy. I mean, if it was just 2 fluky injuries, that would be one thing. But do you remember when he had to take over for Tom Brady after the Deflategate thing? He was supposed to step in for those 4 games, and he couldn't even stay healthy at that point.
Nope.
That's really scary. I think we overlooked that when we made that trade. I wouldn't do anything different, because we gave up a second rounder for Jimmy. That's nothing. That's to have a really good quarterback and then a chance at a Super Bowl victory. That's awesome. But I think that was one thing we might have overlooked. It's likely that he doesn't play a full season, but the options are not good enough to let him go. And you can't afford to get a really good backup quarterback either.
They don't have the cap space to get, yeah. I mean, I think for me, the ideal situation would be that they draft a quarterback in the first round this year, because I think there's a whole bunch of talented guys. The last, we already talked about the Seahawks and the Texans. They were in my we don't know what the hell's going on category. The last teams here, really quickly, are teams that, like, physically I don't think have a quarterback right now. And that's the Bears, the Washington football team, and the Saints. Those are three teams. Can't really draft a quarterback because where they are, unless they get a lesser guy in the second round like we talked about, because I don't think Mac Jones is making it past 15 at the Patriots. Those are teams that physically just do not have quarterbacks right now.
Yeah, Washington football team, name yet to be determined. I guess they're rolling out Heineke. I guess that's the move right now. I guess that's the plan. Kyle Allen, I think, is still there. They have this weird carousel. They got Dwayne Haskins. He's off the team all of a sudden. Alex Smith, who's on one bad leg. You got Kyle Allen. Then you got Heineke in the play. It's a whole weird thing for them. So I don't think you could do that again. So give up what you got to give up to get up in the draft.
Give up what you got to get up to get up in the draft. That's our new album. Anyways, but yeah, no, the draft, very interesting this year. I think I was talking to someone about this the other day. I think if the Falcons do not go quarterback at 4, which I kind of don't think they will, I think you're going to see a lot of teams calling Cincinnati at 5 to move up to try to get a quarterback. Cincinnati at 5, Philly at 6, which I think Philly has their quarterback. I'm a big Jalen Hurts guy. I don't know if they would draft like Justin Fields or someone if he fell to 6. And then Detroit at 7, who they have Jared Goff. I don't think they'll pick a quarterback when they're stuck with Jared Goff for the next 3 years or whatever. But if Atlanta decides not to pick someone, I think we will start to see teams really like jumping to get up there. And even if they do, honestly, I think though that's kind of the sweet spot of where teams are going to try to trade up to.
Yeah, and if you're the Bengals, I think that's the best move for your team is trade back, get as many draft picks as you can, try to fill that team up to the best of your ability. Get Joe Burrow some guys.
Yeah. All right. Last quick thing here. Bold predictions. What is your bold prediction for the 2021 NFL offseason?
This is more general than specific, so technically I don't even think it could be considered a hot take because it's so general. But I think the Jets come out with everybody this year. I think if I'm a free agent and I see what's going on with the Jets, I'm very intrigued. Every NFL player that plays defense knows that Robert Saleh knows defense. Richard Sherman was just doing a podcast with Trent Williams, and he had really amazing things to say about Robert Saleh. Everybody that's ever played with Robert Saleh has said the best things about Robert Saleh. Robert Saleh says the best things about Robert Saleh.
We say the best things about Robert Saleh because, say it with me, folks at home, we are a pro Robert Saleh podcast.
That's right. I think defensive guys want to play with Robert Saleh. That's why Richard Sherman came to the 49ers. I think that the Jets are going to have just a murderer's row of defensive players. And then they're going to draft a quarterback. They'll get a couple of studs on offense, and they're going to shoot up so fast.
I think that's spot on. I like the foundation that they have of that roster a lot, and I think they could absolutely make some moves with the money they have in the draft capital to really build a super quality team there. And I think Robert Saleh is a leader of men, and I think he's absolutely the right guy for the job there. My hot take for the NFL offseason is we are going to see a record 6 quarterbacks drafted in the first round of the draft.
The quarterbacks that go in this first round all pretty much deserve to go in the first round, because I think every draft there comes a time during the scouting process where we just start making up stuff about these prospects, and we just start deciding like, oh yeah, this guy should go towards the end of the first round.
I feel like we kind of did that with Jordan Love last year. A lot of teams did. Where everyone's like, oh, this guy's a lot of potential. Let's put him in the first round.
Yeah, we just start inflating quarterbacks draft stock somewhat arbitrarily towards the end of the process. This year, though, I think all of them are very deserving of a first-round pick. I think that they're all kind of, we keep using the phrase, it's maybe one of our favorite phrases on the podcast. We're a pro phrases podcast, but a high floor kind of guy. I think all of these quarterbacks have a really high floor, and the NFL is going to look so different next year because of this and because of all the other stuff that we've talked about. It's going to be weird. It's going to be fun. I love it.
I'm super excited. I cannot wait to see what happens in the next few months, and especially in the next 3 days after we recorded this podcast and it gets released. We're probably wrong about everything. Deshaun Watson is now an Indianapolis Colt. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. This has been the Nothing Notable Podcast. I'm Jack Hubert, joined by Daniel Elmore. Have a wonderful rest of your day.